This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so I think in last session we are understanding about, so actually we started with understanding about the data types. So as part of the,
Your voice is little bit breaking. Not sure if breaking for everybody or only for me.
is it okay?
Is it that clear for me?
It's clear? Okay.
Okay, maybe
Okay, I think,
there will be some issue at my side.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, let me, so we just started with understanding about the data types. It's already, so we have listed, this is the component. But as part of this example, so there is one of the attribute with the data type function. To understand about that concept, we are understanding about Aura method. Okay, there is one of the standard component from Salesforce. The purpose of the Aura method is, if you want to call the child component function from the parent component, we use Aura method. Okay, so again, in that there are two ways. If you are calling the child component function synchronously, the process is different. And if you are calling the child component function, which is calling one apex controller method, so that time the logic execute asynchronously. That time the process of dealing is different, because the parent component cannot wait until the child component completes the execution, right? So in JavaScript, there is a concept called callback. If something is executed asynchronously, when the asynchronous logic completes executing, then again it will call back the function and execute that particular function. So we are understanding about that concept. So for that, so maybe to avoid confusion, here I have listed the components what we are dealing. Okay, we started creating this component Aura method server child. This component yesterday we created, and there we defined the Aura method, and we need to call that from the parent component. Now this component, let me explain one more time. So this is the component, the child component, where the Aura method is there. Okay, so here Aura method is one of the standard component. To recognize this method, we are giving one name, child async method, and from the parent component, when we call this Aura method, so what is the function it needs to call? Okay, so here we are calling one of the function, and also from the parent component, so what we get as input is one of the function as input. The type of, in general, in the previous example, we took the type as one of the data type. From the parent component, we supplied the values. Here, in this example, when we call this method from the parent component, we are going to supply one of the function as input. Okay, so it will take that function, and so here, when we call this one, this is a JS controller, it is calling. Okay, I'm opening that. So this is our, okay, so this is the method which we are calling from here. Okay, call async function. Okay, so when this is called from parent, whatever we are supplying is one of the function, right? The function name here we gave as callback. Okay, so here within the Aura method, whatever the attributes are there, if you want to read those attributes, so we have to use like component.getParam arguments. In these arguments, all the parameters, all the attribute values will be there. So from that, so our attribute name is callback, right? So we are getting that, and I'm storing into one of the variable. Okay. So now this is nothing but a function. This we are going to, we have the function, but we are going to execute this function once the asynchronous logic execution completes. So just we are keeping that here. I'll show you later when we execute. Okay, now here we are calling one of the apex method. In controller, if you want to call the apex method, the process is first we need to associate the class from the component. Using controller, we are associating to this class. So this is the class. We want to call one of the method in this class. So first we need to associate the class from the component. And now here we are calling the method. The syntax is here whatever the name we give, right? Component dot get c dot and the method which is present in that class. If you see, this is the class. Okay. In this class, I want to call this get cons, this method. Okay, so here same thing we are referring. Let's see dot and the method name. So here we just created instance of that method. Still we are not calling. So to call that method, again, if you go to that class, it is accepting one of the parameter number of cons, one of the variable. Okay. So that value to set. Okay, so here set params and exactly same name of the parameter we have to use, and I'm supplying 5. Okay, so that means it will be going to query up to 5 contacts from the database. Okay, so now just still we are not calling, so just setting the parameters, and this is the place where we are calling $a.enqueue action, an instance of the method which you want to call. This will call the method asynchronously. The response will come later. Okay, so to handle that callback, so here we are using set callback is one of the system function. Okay, that this always first parameter should be this in a function. This is a callback function. So when the response comes, so now the logic, this is the logic it is going to execute. So now here we are checking. Here we should not think that this is the response of the apex method. This is the overall response, whether the method is called or not. Maybe in between due to internet is it not completed. This is the overall status, whether apex method is really called or not. Okay. So to check that, we have a system method called get state. So I'm storing into one of the variable. The possible values can be state is equal to success, error, incomplete. Some other set of values are there. You can see a documentation for full list. Success means it is executed successfully. Error means there is an error while calling. Okay. Maybe some other status, incomplete or anything else, just I am printing in the console.log. Now in case of the success scenario, exactly this method, whatever the result it is returning, if we want to capture that, we have to use dot get return value. This is what the response of the method, whatever it returns, it will capture, right? So this is a returned value from the apex method. Okay, so that I am assigning to this. Finally, if you remember, if you see the callback function here, we assign. Now we are calling that function by supplying this. Okay, so that is what we are doing. So now, how we call this? How we call this method from other component? Now I am going to show. So for that, so to avoid the confusion, right? Already here I have mentioned with this name I am going to create one, and I will show you how we can call. Okay, so maybe in between to avoid confusion, just I am closing the unnecessary whatever we don't need for now. Class also I'm removing. I'm just closing. So now just these two, maybe I'm just keeping. This I'm keeping. Okay. So now our aim is calling this method from one more component. Now I'm going to create a component with this name, Aura method, parent. Press F1, create Aura component. This is the component name I'm giving, and create it. So this is the component which we just created. Okay. So now from the parent component, this is like a parent component. From here we are calling the child. So how we say it is a child, we have to refer that component here. C colon. If you want to refer a component, so the namespace, default namespace C colon, and the child component name is Aura method child, right? Aura method server child. That's the component name. Okay, and also to recognize this component in the JavaScript, I'm giving some ID. Okay, to recognize the Lightning components with a unique ID, we use Aura ID, right? So Aura ID is equal to the unique ID we give, right? Child server method ID, something I'm giving. Based on this ID, I will recognize this method. Okay. So now, and when exactly we are going to call the child component function? When I click on a button. Okay, here I'm introducing one button to call. Okay. So I'm using a button, one of the standard component, Lightning colon button. Okay, we have a standard component label. So maybe call child server method. Okay, this is the name of the button I'm giving. So on click of this button, I want to call the JavaScript controller function. We use C dot name of the function, right? So here call async child method. Whatever you feel you can give, right? Maybe I'm giving the function name like this. Okay. So still this is not defined. So we have to define this function, right? Now, when you open this component, when you see the result of this component on the UI, we see this button. On click on this button, we are going to call this JavaScript function, which we are going to write in the controller.js. So now here I'm opening the controller.js, and the function name, whatever we are expecting, is this call async child method. This is the one, right? And also here I want to use the short form like this I'm using. So now from here we need to call, right? So here is the place where we are calling, right? Calling child component async method. Okay, to call, first we need to identify this component. Okay, based on the ID, if you want to identify this component dot find. Okay, give the ID of that component. This is the ID, so that this entire component it can recognize. So now in this method, right, in this child component, right? So this entire thing is like a child component, right? So maybe I'm storing in child async component. Let's say into that variable I'm storing to make it very easy. So now in this child component, I want to call this method, right? So this method, copying that, dot, right? This is a child component dot. This is the method which we need to call, this one. Okay, this is accepting a input. It is accepting one of the function as input, right? Attribute of the type function type it is expecting. So now inside this, we have to supply a function. Okay, so here I'm defining one of the anonymous function. Anonymous function means function without any name. Directly function we can define, right? So function. Okay, this is a function I'm supplying, and this function, when someone calls this function will accept one of the parameters. Let's say the contacts record as a parameter. Okay, so now here, so whatever someone supplies that. Now for now I am going to print and show you. Okay, so to print in the JavaScript console, we have to say console.log and JSON.stringify, and so I'm going to supply whatever the contacts supplied. I'm going to give this. Okay, so directly if I print, what will happen? It won't give more details. JSON.stringify, why you use? If the JavaScript object, if it is not showing more details in the console, when we use JSON.stringify, it will show all the content in detail. For that purpose, we use JSON.stringify. Okay, so that's it. We are done. Now, how exactly this is going to work? Yeah, I'll show you. So now I'm going to refer this component, this parent component in the data types component, whatever we have. So I'm opening this data types component. Here I'm placing, this is asynchronous example, and in this case, our component, whatever the parent component just now we created, so I want to give that name, right? Aura method server parent. That is the component. Just now, whatever we created, that component name is this one. Okay. So now, first let me save all this information into server, and I'll show you exactly from where to where it will call. Okay. So here, based on what we created so far, this is one component, and one more component, server, I think child. So here in package.xml, I'm including all these components which I want to deploy. Instead of opening each and every Aura bundle and deploying, it is very easy. Now altogether here in our local folder, whatever all this logic I wrote, everything I am going to deploy at it. Okay. Now we are deploying. So looks like there is some error. Right? Let's see what is that. No component name, Aura method, server child.
Yes,
So Aura method is
capital in the second one.
Yeah, this one. Just to deploy. Yeah, so let me, sometimes we might see, let me try one more time. It's not showing any error. Okay, so let me cross check those. Aura method child, and one more Aura method parent. Does it look like everything is okay? Now, let me try one more time. In general, in case of any issue, it will show the details, why it is failing. Okay, so let me maybe try to deploy the individual component. Okay, so first, just now today, whatever we created, first I'm deploying this one and see, is there any problem with this? Right click and deploy. Okay, I think in this Aura method, this component is having some issue. Let's see. So here controller. So first of all, yesterday whatever the controller class I created, did I deploy in server? So that is also maybe I'm opening that class now and make sure that I'm deploying that class. Okay. Okay, I think now it is deployed. Now let me try this one more time, deploying this component, deploy. Okay, so it's not deployed. Let's see what is wrong. So component controller, we are just referring that class. It is fine. Aura method, we are calling it's in function. Controller are also same name we have. I think it is looking fine. Let me see dot. So this is correct. Type function. Basically, I think I need to maybe restart this VS Code. In general, it will show errors properly. Let me one time close it and open and see. Okay, I think it is loading. It is taking some time. So meanwhile, any questions, anyone so far?
Shinu, can you explain parent side controllers? There is one of the line that I didn't understand. Can you go to the
Sorry,
please?
can you repeat again?
Can you go to the parent side controller, please? So I can show you the line that I did not understand.
Okay, the parent component.
Controller. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me open that. Yeah, this is the one.
Yeah. So can you explain the line number 6, please?
Yeah. So now, this one based on the ID, we are identifying that component and storing into this variable. Now, here dot. This is the name of the Aura method, which is present in that child component, right? So this is the name of the Aura method. Okay, so if you go and check the name of that Aura method, so this is the name, right? That's what I am referring. But this Aura method, as an input, what it is expecting?
Function.
So one of the function type, right? Type function it is expecting as a input. Okay, so same thing here. I'm defining the anonymous function. I'm supplying this function as input. If you see from here to here, this is a function. Right? It will set this function as a input into that attribute. That is what happened. Okay. This we call as the anonymous function, function without any name. In JavaScript, we can define the anonymous functions like this. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now let me deploy this child component. Just I'm trying to expand. Okay, so now maybe, so what is happening here? I'm not seeing some error. So what I do, the same component I'm going to create from the directly developer console and see. So what is wrong? Okay, this with the same name or another. Just copy. So directly let me create in the developer console. New lightning component. This is the name I am giving. Submit. This component is created. So now maybe, so whatever the logic we have, this just copying and keeping here. So now it is saved. Now controller. So already we wrote the logic. I'm copying that controller logic. This is the one. Copy and the paste here. Yeah, I think here there is something wrong is going on. So now, so here to know that I'm just removing, saving. Okay, so here somewhere the problem is there. Okay, so now I understood. The problem is we cannot define the constant, okay, so without assigning any value. Okay, that's the problem. In JavaScript, if you are defining a constant, we have to assign some default one value into that. Okay, so without assigning a value, defining the constant is not possible. So that's the problem. So due to that, I think everything. So since that is JavaScript error, maybe somehow this Salesforce compiler is not able to recognize. Okay, so now let means we can define and later we can assign the value. So now this should resolve the problem. Okay, now maybe directly I'm opening this package.xml and I'm trying to deploy. Okay, now it is deployed, right? So now maybe I'll explain exactly to avoid confusion how exactly from where to where it is calling. So maybe close everything. Now this data types component is referred in this test application, whatever we are define. Okay, now we are seeing the preview of this test application. So now when you are seeing the preview, okay, so in this component, okay, so here in one of the place, so this is the one, right? This piece of logic is here we are referring the Aura method server parent. Okay, this part is due to that Aura method server parent. This part. Okay. Now this part logic is, so when you open this one, Control B and open. Right. So this is the logic which you are seeing. Okay. Here, this is the button we are seeing. Okay. So when you click on this button, what will happen? As soon as we click on this button, it is going to call the function which is present in the controller.js of this component. Okay, I'm opening the controller.js. This is the one. So it will call this and it will identify this method. This based on the ID, it is identified and stored into this variable. Now through this, we are calling the child component async method, Aura method. Okay. So now I'll show you in child component what exactly it will call. Control P. I'm opening the child component. This is the child component. So this is what it is calling. Okay. So while calling, what are the parameters it is expecting? A function. A function as input it is expecting. Right. So that function only here we are supplying. So this is the function. Right. So this function will be assigned to this attribute callback. Okay. So now, so this when exactly we are going to, so as soon as we supply everything, it will immediately invoke this function which is inside this child component. Okay, the controller.js. This is the logic. Okay, when it started executing, in the arguments, whatever the attributes are there in the Aura method, to get all the attribute values, we use get param and all the parameters are there. If at least one parameter is there, the attribute name is callback, right? Here we have the function whatever we supply, right? This is nothing but a function, right? It is like function callback is the function name, and the function is function. The function is accepting contacts one of the parameter value, right? But we are not calling this for now. We are storing into one variable. So when we are calling, after making the server call, once the response comes from here, right? So now this is nothing but, this callback is nothing but function, right? If you remember, this is what we supplied, right? Function and so contacts, this is what we created, right? So here whatever we supplied will be supplied into this function. In that what we wrote console.log and we are printing this contacts, right? The final result will be, you see it is printing whatever the query contacts are there, it is going to print in the console.log. Okay, so that's what will happen. Now let's see. So that is happening or not. Just we see the result in the console. Okay, I'm opening the console here, close it, and this is the one. On click on this. Okay, so that is nothing but this one. Again and again I'm explaining because people are confusing. It will call, this is a button we are clicking. On click, so it is calling this one, and it is identifying the child component and calling the Aura method in the child component by supplying this, right? So when the child component function execution completes, this will be called in the child component and it will print this one, right? So now let's click on this. Okay, so now I think, sorry, I clicked on something else. So in our current example, whatever we are dealing is this button. Okay, click on this button. Okay, so get param is not a function. We are getting some error. Component dot get param. So this is calling the child component and the child component function also. So here cmp dot get param. Okay, it is saying get param is not a function. Okay, so here something is going wrong, but the same thing we created, if you remember.
Srini, I think it's get params, multiple
Get
parameters.
params.
I believe.
Okay.
I'm not remembering.
Yeah,
But just
Anyway, I think we already created our method child.
we have
Okay,
created
maybe-
it somewhere.
It's param
maybe
only.
let's refer this. Right. Okay, so here I supposed to say event dot. I mentioned as a component dot, right? So this.
Mhm.
So here we supposed to, right? This params will come from event. Okay. So this is the mistake. Okay. So this one I have corrected. Okay. So here event dot get param. That's the problem. Now again go to package.xml and deploy. Now it is deployed. Now again just refresh. Now click on this. Now if you see, I think everything is executed smoothly, and it is getting 5 contacts which we queried. Okay, and here we are printing. Maybe with that, if you want to do something else, you can also do. Right? Maybe do you want to display that information in a table or in a list? You can do. Maybe let's say I want to display in a list. So if you want to display in a list in the parent component, so this is a parent component, right? So in the parent component, so maybe I'm closing other things here. I'm going to define one of the attribute and storing the result into that attribute. Aura, and I'm defining attribute. Name of the attribute. All the contacts should be stored into this attribute. Okay. Type. If you take list data type, right? One of the data type list. It can accept any type of list. Okay. This is the attribute where it will hold the list of contacts. It can be contact or account or any list it can hold. Any array it can hold. That's the purpose of this data type. So I am assigning the result into, along with the printing in the console, I want to assign into that attribute. So from the JavaScript controller for the attribute, if you want to assign the value, component dot set. Okay. To refer the attribute, we use v dot name of the attribute. Contacts is the name of the attribute. And what is the array? Here we need to assign the array, right? So basically, whatever list of contacts it is returning, I can directly assign to that. Okay, now what will happen? All the contacts it is assigning to this attribute. Now what I'll do, I'm going to iterate over this and display in a list to make it very simple. So here I want to give one line break, and after that here, let's say in a unordered list I want to display. But now if you see, this is a list, right? We need to iterate over each and every element and display. So in Aura, if you want to iterate over the collection or the list or set or multiple values, so we use Aura iteration, right? Like Apex repeat in Visualforce, here we use Aura iteration. Here the list of values we have to store into items. one of the attribute. So here now all the records are there in this attribute. To refer the attribute, we have to say v and the name of the attribute contacts. Now from that each and every contact name, we need to give some name. Let's say I'm giving as com. Okay. Now each and every contact in a list. Let's say I want to give the just print the name of the contact. Okay, so here I'm taking list in unordered list. This is the one of the list element. Okay. So here I'm going to refer that name in a dynamic way. So this is each contact. In the contact, what we need is, so let's say I want to display the contact last name. Okay. So that's it. Okay. So now contact last name will be displayed in a list format. Okay. So just right click and deploy all these components and go back. You just refresh. So when we see that list, only when you click on this, that time only the records will come into that attribute and you have to see that list. And click on this. If you see that list you are seeing, okay, so that is what is happening. Okay, but where is the logic? The logic is in the child component. Okay, so when you have a situation to call the one of the function which is in the child component, we use Aura method. Okay, now why we are discussing about Aura method? To discuss about one of the data type called function. Okay, so that function type in general in the direct component we cannot use attribute data type function. Only inside Aura method we can use the function type of attribute. So that's why I explained all these things. Okay. So with this, so we are done with this example. Okay. So any questions so far on understanding this example? So maybe, right, since we are dealing with the multiple components and each component is having multiple files, there might be some confusion. That's why to avoid that, here I am maintaining, right? For you, you'll get to know this is the component you need to refer. In that I included this and this. But this component is internally included, this one. This component is internally included, this one. You can open that and see the logic of that. So since that way I'm just maintaining here so that it will be helpful to refer and understand. Okay, so that's it. So before we start with the next example, let me know if you have any questions.
Yes, we know one question.
Yeah.
So on the parent controller JS, can you open that file? Parent controller JS.
Sorry, this one?
No, the parent controller JS.
Parent component. Okay.
Parent controller JS.
Okay, server parent JS.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
Yes, so again on line 6, how do you pass or where do you define the contacts variable? In the function, this parameter send contacts, right? Line 6, the function, you send the contacts, right, to that function.
Yeah, so now.
So where do you define the contacts, or where is the query that gets the list of contacts? What is that variable defined?
Yeah, understood. So now what is happening? Here we are supplying this function, right? This function is not going to execute immediately. Okay. So this logic, the function logic we are supplying, but it's not that now it is going to execute. Okay. This logic will execute later. So when it is executing, okay, so this piece of logic, whatever I copied, will be executed. In the child component. So when you open that child component, and when this child server component controller, no. So when this is called, right? So here, if you see everything is executed, this is the place, right? Now, once we get the response, this is
Okay.
the function, right? Now, whatever the right, right, we are calling a fx method from here. Whatever the response is coming. Now, when you do like this, what internally it will do, it is like we are calling this function. It's like we are calling that function by supplying this context, right? Here it will execute, and from here it will set into the parent one.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like this, whatever the function logic we are supplying as input is executing later. So that's the concept of the callback. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and also maybe after maybe a few days, I'll share some of my JavaScript workshop videos. So there, all these basics of JavaScript. Right now, again, I'm not really explaining all the JavaScript concepts. Again, that also take a lot of time. So I'll share those videos, and once you have understanding on how JavaScript works, how JavaScript callback functions works, then I think you will get even more understanding. Okay. Now, any other questions? Okay. So we have to practice. So when you practice, I think already, so you'll understand all these things. Okay. Now let me take one more example. So this time, so far as part of this example, the basic type is a string, integer, those kind of, and the iteration already we use a function type as part of the Aura method. Just now we are done. So this one little later about this action. So Aura action is also one of the type. So this will, I'll explain little later. So standard object, custom object, I think already yesterday I have defined one of the standard object and showed how it works. Collection means list. Set means, again, set type won't allow the duplicates. You can play with that by adding some values. So this anyway, going forward, wrapper class and some examples are there as part of that I will cover. Okay. That's about different Aura data types. When you define Aura attribute, what are the types to understand? So now we are going to understand about one of the topic, so expressions. Okay, so maybe this topic, I'm going to maybe here something. I'm going to create one component with the name expressions, and I will explain all these expressions, how we deal with that. I'm going to maybe create a component with the name expressions and explain. So bound expression, unbound expression, right? So how, what is the difference? So different types I'll explain. Okay. So now to understand about that, I am creating one of the component with the name expressions. Aura component expressions. Okay, this is the component, right? So now, so maybe for us to understand about these expressions, first I am defining two attributes to hold first name and the last name. Okay. So if you want to store any information and display on the UI, we use attributes or attribute. Name of the attribute I'm taking as first name. Data type, I want the data type as string. And do you want to give some default value? So you can give some default value, or you can maybe assign the value later. So let's say this is the default value I'm giving. So here, last name, some default values just I'm giving. We can also maybe while invoking this component, we can change these values. Okay. So otherwise, let's say maybe I want to input later. You can leave it like this. Then now, so what I want to display the first name and the last name inputs. Okay. So if you want to display the input, so we use lightning. There is a component input. Okay. And maybe first time when we start working, it is practically we cannot remember typing like that also. Okay, so I always recommend you to go to this lightning component library and refer. Okay, but if you refer later, I mean, we'll never remember if you don't type. Maybe for us, remembering is not possible. Every time we need to copy from here. That's what will happen. Maybe try to type so that next time, right, you can type by our own. So now my requirement is I want the input of the type text. Okay, so you can go to text type and they have some examples if you want to disable how it is and all those things. So basically by default, if you don't mention any type, the input is in a text type. Okay, you see this same way I'm going to refer here, right? So input, I'm not giving any type. So label, at least the required attribute is label, right? So let's say I'm giving name and all. If you don't want to give it, okay, it is fine. If you give it, is better. Okay, so label is one of the required, one of the attribute for this standard component. So label, let's say here I'm giving as first name. Okay, and also I'm displaying the last name, right? So now, so what I'll do, I want to again add one more. I'll say full name. Okay, but this one I don't want to accept as a input. I want to just disable it. Disabled is equal to true. And here, whatever the value we enter, if you want to hold that value, right? So we use value. So whatever we type, that value where we want to assign in the attribute first name, right? That is the way. In the same way, whatever we type in the last name, I want to assign to last name attribute, right? V dot to access the attribute name. Now whatever we type in this input box will store into first name this value and last name into the. Now for full name I don't have any attribute. So what I'll do here also I'm giving value and here in the expression, right? Here we can use the dynamic expressions. We can combine multiple values together and show. Right, one of the expression what I'm writing v dot first name. So whatever the value present in the first name attribute plus, and I want to give space in between, space plus whatever the name present in the last name. I'm concatenating and I'm showing. That's what I'm doing. Now here we have two attributes which can accept which can hold first name and last name. Two inputs. Whenever we enter the value, automatically that value will be stored into this attribute. Whenever we enter value here, it will store into this. Automatically, system will be having the capability to combine both and the display. Okay, that is the internal mechanism how it can do. So maybe let me deploy this. Since I don't have any other resources, directly I can right click and deploy. Okay. Now I'm deploying. Just quickly, I want to show you how it is looking. So this one, I want to refer here. Okay, so maybe I'm removing that. Our component name is expressions. Once it is deployed, I think it is deployed. Save. Now if you see the input, at present this is how it is showing, right? We'll style it. Okay. For now, just focus on functionality. So let's say that whatever I'm giving, right? So it is automatically calculated by this expression, right? So that is one thing. So now, if you see while defining the dynamic expression, so when we use this exclamatory symbol, so that we call as bound expression. Bound means whenever there is a change in that attribute value, that value automatically will be refreshed and displayed on the UI. Wherever that is referred, everywhere the value will be reflected. Unbound means only, so whatever the value we assign, that will be stored into that particular instance. If this is referred any other places, that won't be reflected, that it won't show on the UI. That's what will happen. Okay, maybe to show that, what I'll do, unbound means like this. Okay, so this is the example of the unbound expression. Unbound expression, after changing the value, if that value is referred any other way, other place, that attribute is referred any other way, other place, it won't really refresh and show that value. That is unbound. Okay, bound means, so by default we use this exclamatory symbol, right? So that is bound. So that means if there is a value change, wherever that is referred, that value will be reflected in that place. Okay. Now just I am deploying and I'll show you the difference. Okay. Now this is bound. That means when I change, that value will automatically reflected in all other places where it is referred. Here, even though I change, it is referred in other place, it won't reflect. Okay, so just refresh. Right? If you see, whatever I'm typing is not coming here. Right? So that's one of the point about the unbound expression. Okay, now maybe since we don't have time, tomorrow maybe we'll style it and show in a proper way. And also from parent to child, child to parent, how we supply the data using these attributes and this bound and unbound, how this will work. We'll deal tomorrow, okay, when we continue. And also we have ternary operator. And also when we use end, if you have two conditions and if you are adding two conditions, maybe we use this end. In some times this won't work. Okay, we need to queue like this. Right? So all those examples we'll see tomorrow. Okay. So before ending today, any questions? We completed tomorrow about this. Okay. So followed by the other topics. Okay, slowly. Any questions? Are you able to follow, or are you feeling something difficult? So what do you feel so far? This time asking.
It's a little bit confusing, but with the practice, I believe it will be clear.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. But when compared to this Aura, I think LWC is easy. Yeah, I think Miguel, any questions?
No. I was just saying, like, it's a bit confusing at the beginning, but I think with a bit of practice should be okay.
Yeah. So I believe these notes will be useful to you. So refer these notes and do that. And I think I'm forgetting to upload into this repository. Let me take a few minutes and upload into repository, and so that you have access to this code. Okay. Just I'm opening my GitHub. I'm creating a new repository. Our account is, this is 96. Okay, I'm creating a repository. In GitHub. Okay, now maybe I'm creating a private repository so that only to whom I give access, only they can access this. That means you should also have GitHub. If you don't have, just you can register and have that. Okay. Now this repository will be generated with one unique URL. Okay. Now in the VS Code, already I have installed so GitHub extension. Okay. Git extension. So basically, Git is the one. Through that Git, whatever. Actually, if you click here, I think yesterday already I initiated repository. All our changes will be applied into this. Okay. Now we need to commit that. Let's say I'll say first commit. All the changes, whatever we made, will be first stored into a local repository. That means in our local system only. So all our changes will be, so far whatever we did will be there. That I want to push into remote repository. GitHub is a remote repository. Okay, so here you see one option, push, and I'm just giving push to add remote. Okay, so add remote from GitHub, and just please provide the remote name. Let's say I'm giving like this. August 13, password authentication was removed. Please use personal access token. Okay, so actually something they retired. So I use it to connect using username and password. Somehow that was deprecated. Okay, so okay, so I think request URL unable to access. Password authentication, use personal access token.
I think name what you have given is, there is no hash, right? Bash 96 Aura plus LWC.
Yeah, that is not a problem. That is here. Okay. Here, whatever I'm giving that. The thing is, I use it to connect to using the username and password. Somehow, I think there is a change in the policy. Okay, so I think I need to figure out on the other way of authentication. Maybe I'll explore that and I'll maybe let you know. Okay, I need to refer this documentation. I'll maybe create it and add all your email addresses into that. Okay.
Okay.
We'll continue tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah.